So now I want to tell you guys a little story time about how I came across this topic in college. I went to a liberal arts college, and one class I took was social justice. Literally everything in this class was about racism and sexism and this phobia and that phobia. Everything we talked about was about some kind of oppression that was supposedly happening. On one particular day, everyone in the class was sharing their own personal experiences with racism. Now, this was very interesting because most of the kids in the class were minority with a few white students. And if you think kids were telling stories about how they were chased down and yelled at and told they can't go into a store because of their race, you are dead wrong, because most of these stories were not really racist. I remember one black girl in my class completely freaking out after the police officers pulled her over for speeding 5 miles over the speed limit, and she was convinced that instantly we went back to 1962. This one Chinese girl said that when she was in elementary school, kids would often ask her if she could see what was on the chalkboard, and she looked at all of them and asked,
"Is it because I'm Asian?"
That is not racist. It's just not. So as you can see, a lot of these stories that were being shared by these kids of color were not racist. They were very trivial things that were being blown out of proportion. But what I found very interesting was that after everyone shared their story, there were these nods and these hums and people giving feedback and really pretending that this was an example of racism in America. I can't begin to tell you how many kids said they experienced racism when they were asked where they were from or where their parents were from, as if that's an offensive question to ask. So after all the students of color shared their stories, I remember this one white guy in my class raised his hand, and everyone kind of looked at him like, what can you possibly have gone through that was racist? So this guy said that he went to a mostly black high school where he was beaten up, harassed, bullied, jumped, called white trash, and a bunch of other anti-white slurs. He talked about how he hated going to that school, but he had to because he came from a very poor family, or how he was always treated differently because of his race. Now, instantly, this white kid story was worse than everyone else in my class because it was an example of actual racism. But can you guess the response from the other students as well as the professor after he got done telling his story? He ended his story by saying that he knows how racism feels like too. And people started laughing. That's right, people were literally laughing. Now, not everyone obviously, but the majority of the class definitely was. But I'll never forget my professor, who herself was white by the way, and she sided with all these other kids, and she looked at the white student and said that his story wasn't a real example of racism, and that as white people, their job is to listen and not speak, because by listening, they can better understand the problems that people of color face. Now, I was definitely shocked and appalled by her analysis, but I couldn't wrap my head around the fact that we were supposed to pretend that asking people where they're from is racist, but a white kid being verbally abused and assaulted is not racist. I just did not understand the hypocrisy. Now, that was definitely an eye-opening experience for me, and it made me realize that when it comes to racism, there are stories that people want to listen to all day long, and there are stories that they'd rather ignore. Alright guys, that is it for this video. Do you think that white people can experience racism or no? Do you believe that it's possible for black people to be racist toward white people? Whatever you believe, let me know down in the comments. And as always, see you next time.